Welcome to the Her Empowered Divorce Live broadcast. I'm your host, Beverly Price. I'm the empowering divorce coach who prepares you for your divorce and guides you on your journey before, during, and after to eliminate your pain, overwhelm, sadness, and anger, and help you create more knowledge, skill, and happiness than I experienced myself in my divorce. My goal is to empower you from the moment you are considering divorce to confidently move forward in your divorce process. I want to prepare you for your divorce, manage your emotions, avoid common mistakes, and ultimately create a happy and fulfilling life. Now, today, I want to talk to you about a critical conversation. There's one conversation in divorce that's more important than any other, and that is the conversation you have when you tell your spouse you want a divorce. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first part of preparing for this conversation is to look at what you need to do before you actually have that conversation. Well, you might say, I just need to go ahead and do it, and I need to think about when I'm going to do it. And obviously, those are key components, but there's some other things that help you prepare. And I want you to know the reason why this conversation is so important. It's important because the conversation where you tell your spouse sets the tone for the entire rest of your divorce and co-parenting if appropriate. So for example, if your conversation is accusatory, tense, bringing up all the past problems, angry, blaming, then the person on the receiving end of that conversation is going to feel threatened, is going to feel tense, is going to feel anger back. Just think for a moment how you would feel if somebody came to you, if your spouse came to you and brought up all your past issues, true or false, in the divorce and began to, I would say, put you down for those things. Well, think about how you're going to react. You know, whenever I'm in conflict where someone's accusing me, I go into defensive mode. Is that what you would do? My defensive mode is there to protect myself. And one of the things I would do is lash back without the proper training. So that is why this conversation is absolutely so critical. If you want the smoothest divorce that you can possibly have, there's a tremendous amount of planning that needs to go into this conversation. Never just drop the bomb on somebody without thinking and planning what you're going to do. So, what do you need to do to prepare? And this all happens before the conversation. You need to gather documents, and this means all your financial documents. This means all of your legal documents. And what do I mean by that? I mean tax returns, bank statements, investment statements, mortgage statements, other assets, essentially any piece of paper or any online document you would need to create your entire financial position. So that's the first step. And that may take a while. You may have to hunt and peck and, kind of deeply look for those. You may have to call your bank or your investment person to get that information. You want to make sure, however, whatever you do is not going to, quote, tip off your spouse. Because another worst thing you can do is have your spouse learn that you're thinking about divorce before you actually have the conversation. That would be a bomb, and that would be shock, and that wouldn't bring on a good conversation. So gather those documents. The legal documents you could need are wills, mortgage documents, deeds, property assignments, any of those kind of documents, prenuptial agreements, postnuptial agreements, and so forth. So gather all those. The second element of this is to hire a financial professional who knows how to put the information together and help you determine what your assets are, what your income is, what your budget is, and then what possible settlements may be reached. This professional is called a CDFA, and that stands for a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. They are experienced in putting data together specifically for divorce. If you don't know a CDFA, contact me and my information will be in the show notes and I can help you find one. The second thing is critical and maybe should even happen before you start gathering documents is to protect your technology. First of all, put passwords on computers, phones, iPads, anything that can be accessed by another person. Second, what you want to do is look at, make sure there's no spyware or other things on your technology. You want to remove yourself from family calendar, or more importantly, create a new email address specifically that isn't on a family calendar that you can use for all your divorce communications. So create that email is absolutely critical. You don't, again, want your spouse to become knowledgeable about what you're doing. Once you gather the information, once you protect your technology, you want to work on your emotions. Anytime you're thinking about divorce, there's a myriad of emotions that you come in contact with. And, you might ask, why do I need to work on my emotions? I've been holding my emotions in for years and years in my marriage. Well, one of the biggest mistakes you can make in divorce is to let your emotions hijack you. And what I mean by that is when you are so filled with emotions, your brain fills with a chemical, and that chemical makes it impossible for you to think clearly. Why do you need to think clearly? You need to think clearly to be able to communicate effectively, to negotiate, to analyze proposed settlements. You need to think clearly to develop parenting plans. You need to think clearly if you're in mediation to look at proposals. So having a clear head is absolutely critical. One of the things I suggest to my clients is to imagine a box. This can be as ornate a box as you like. It has a lid and it has a lock. What you're going to do when you are either reviewing settlements, when you are walking into a meeting with your spouse and attorneys, whether you are walking into meetings with just attorneys, you want to take all of those emotions and put them in that box and lock it. Because the mindset you want to have is a business neutral mindset so that you can think clearly. Then once you leave that meeting or leave that situation, you can unlock that box and take your emotions back. But at least for those interactions and any other critical decision times, you want to have the ability to think clearly. Now, when we've touched on this a little bit earlier, but if you were on the receiving end of the conversation with your spouse, you want to set that conversation up in the most tension-free, stress-free environment as possible. You want to look at the setting. Do you want to do it in your home? Do you want to do it in public in case there's a terrible reaction? Just where do you want to have it? The second is, what is the timing that you want to have? Well, first of all, as we said before, you want to set the time after you've had the time to not only collect the documents, hire CDFA, protect your technology, and so forth, but you also want to wait until you get the results of the CDFA's analysis so that you know where you stand financially before you even proceed with setting aside the time to have this conversation. The other thing you want to think about in terms of the setting of the conversation is you want to think about the environment. Has it been crazy around the house? Is there lots of noise? Is there something happening that would be very distracting? You don't want your spouse watching TV while you're talking to them. And the third and the last one is, think about the children. You don't want your children in the house. You don't want your children anywhere in earshot of this conversation. So you need to make arrangements and do it at such time that the children aren't around. Because if they hear this conversation before you have time to plan and talk to them, then they are having the same terrible reaction that your spouse would if you drop the bomb. And in addition, it can create them lots of problems ongoing. The next piece you want to do is create the appropriate mindset going in. You want to ask yourself, if I was on the receiving end of this conversation, what would I want to hear? And it's not that anybody really wants to hear that their spouse wants a divorce, but it's how I would like to be talked to. You've heard the expression, it's the delivery rather than the message, or I'm conveying the message but with inappropriate delivery. And that's what we're talking about. Want to think about how to construct this. And what I suggest to clients is to write out that conversation. Practice it, role play it with someone. I role play them with my clients over and over again until they get comfortable. Then you might say, once I've set the time, once I've set the environment, the kids are out of the house, what am I going to say? Am I going to go into detail about what I want to do with the house, what I want to do with the kids, all of that? Is it going to turn into a slugfest and name calling? So what do you want to say in that very first conversation? Well, the purpose of this conversation, the very first one, is to deliver the message, to deliver the message as calmly and clearly as you possibly can, with empathy and without accusation. So if you've written it down and you go back over and over to look at, and you imagine if someone held this conversation with me, how I would react, then you are prepared. So as you go into that conversation, what you're going to say is to your spouse, I want to have some dedicated time to talk to you. When is good for you? And then you want to say something to the effect of, I want a divorce. Your spouse is going to react in many ways. And you know your spouse better than anyone to know how the reaction may be. So that's another reason that it's very important to role play this conversation with someone that has experience in doing that. Your spouse could lash out in anger, confusion, could beg you to stay, and so on and so on. But remember, the purpose of this first conversation is just for you to deliver the message. So if your spouse comes back and starts asking questions about detail. If your spouse comes back lashing out at you, what you then want to convey is, I understand there's a lot of emotion, or I understand that there's a lot of detail we need to work through. And we can do that at a later time. But I just wanted to have this conversation to let you know what my intentions were to move forward with the divorce. And then physically remove yourself. Now, you might say, well, if I already know what I want to do with custody, if I already know what I want to do with the house, can I share that information? Yes, you can. But sometimes there's the risk of, if you start to share detailed information, they're going to want to know more and more and more. And with the conversation being so emotional at its base, this can tend to cause you to make poor decisions, be rattled, be upset. So I suggest just conveying that information first, and then setting a time to have the second conversation, whether it's that evening, whether it's the next day. But again, with that second conversation, you want to plan the time, you want to plan the environment, and you want to make sure your children aren't in the house. So now we've got this issue of how to respond to your spouse's emotions. And again, we want to have empathy, but we want to make sure that conversation is clear. In some cases, you and your spouse may have been talking about divorce for a long, long time. You may have brought it up, and you may have brought it up a number of times and then not taking action about it. So there's one possibility, and that is your spouse might not take you seriously because it's been brought up so much. Or your spouse can beg you to stay, say they will change, say things they'll be different, say they'll go into therapy, say that they will change the parts of their behavior that you find you can't live with. Again, you want this first conversation to be just very clear that you want a divorce. You don't want to use language that could be misinterpreted as waffling. You don't want to say, I think I want a divorce. You want to come out and say, I want a divorce and I'm moving forward. Crystal clear. But you want to do it in a tone and in a message that isn't antagonistic, doesn't tear a person down, doesn't belittle them. You want to watch out for your tone on this. That is absolutely critical. So you're going to have that conversation. And again, always ask yourself, how would I like to be talked to if I was on the receiving end of this conversation? Anger, bitterness, resentment, blaming does not have a place in the first or second conversation. And the more you can eliminate these emotions in conversations with your spouse, again, the better your overall divorce process and co-parenting will be. So now we've talked about how to set up the conversation, how to hold the conversation, and how to respond to conversation. We then move into the second conversation. And again, the environment, the surrounding, the timing, the tone of voice is identical to the first. The second conversation may be, what are the specifics? It might be questions like, what happens with the house? What happens with child custody? What happens with any property or assets that you have? But typically, the two biggest fears in divorce are finances and child custody. So those typically are going to be the two things that are brought up. This is another example where you want to write out your responses before you have that conversation. And you probably want to go ahead and do this before you even have your first conversation as well, just in case the second conversation needs to come soon after the first. If you practice that conversation and you practice your answers, remember that knowledge is power. Practice is important. This way, you don't get flustered, you don't get upset, you don't forget what you're going to say. If you have the financial results from the CDFA that include all of your information, yours and your spouse's, you may be able to talk a little bit about finances. But what I suggest in that second conversation is information about how you envision child custody being held, what you think might happen with the house, and what type of divorce you want to pursue. Do you want mediation? Do you want a collaborative divorce? Do you want a pro se divorce that you do it yourself without attorneys? Or do you envision this is going to court? Now, I want to preface all of this with saying there's some situations that everything I outlined is inappropriate. Number one, if there's domestic violence, if there's domestic abuse, you do not want to have this conversation in the way I've outlined. Your first call should be to a domestic violence expert, whether that's your local shelter, whether it's the national hotline. The national hotline's number is 800-799-7233. The folks that man this number know everything there is to know about preparing to leave this spouse. They also will give you information that can help smooth your fears. Here's the appropriate thing to do. But you absolutely do not want to do anything without a safety plan. Because at this point in time, whether you tell your spouse you're leaving in an abusive situation, or whether you leave without safety plan and preparation, there's a substantial number of women who are murdered. So you do not want to be in that place. So this is one conversation you don't want to follow the advice I've just mentioned, and that is with domestic violence. The other situation, and what you need to do after you talk to the hotline or an expert, is call directly to an attorney with experience handling domestic violence cases. With the tips that I've mentioned before, when it doesn't include domestic violence or hostile personalities, I would suggest that your first call is to a divorce coach. A divorce coach can help you understand the divorce process to come. They can help you determine who might be important on your team. They can help you manage your emotions, and they can help you select appropriate team members. They can tell you about the types of divorce and therefore the professionals that you would need. So all of this kind of comes full circle in terms of the conversation you have with your spouse. The second person that is on this core team I've mentioned earlier, and that's the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. The third person that you want on this team is your legal professional, whether it is an attorney, whether it is a mediator, whether it is collaborative legal professionals. These are three core people in any divorce team. Some people say, I don't need a divorce team. I've got an attorney and that's all I need. Well, let me tell you something. Attorneys are not financial experts. Attorneys cannot help you manage your emotions, and attorneys cannot be your advocate from the very beginning to the very end of divorce. Working with divorce professionals like a CDFA and a certified divorce coach help you save time, money, and heartache. If you walk into a meeting with a divorce attorney and you don't have your emotions in check, if you haven't processed them, you're going to be sitting there talking to that attorney like a therapist or like you talk to a coach. And the attorney is either going to say, I can't help you with that, or they will listen and bill you at their high rate. Let's say something like, $400 to $500 an hour. If you start working with a divorce coach, they can help you through this process and prepare for that conversation with the attorney so that the amount of time you're billed at this higher rate is much less, thereby saving you money. The attorney also is not necessarily a financial expert in divorce, like the certified divorce financial analyst is. The certified divorce financial analyst knows exactly what information is needed to give you the total picture of your situation. This is absolutely critical. So with both these team members, you are walking in prepared. You will use less time with the attorney, and you will also be able to participate more fully. You will understand the conversations more, and you will have absolutely all the information you need to have this conversation. So one of the things I like to do in all my episodes and shows is to come up with 3 actionable tips that you can do right away to make your divorce better. And I actually have 4 for this one. The first is remember to gather all your financial and legal documents. This is before you have the conversation. You want to hire your CDFA to begin working on this information. The second is you want to protect your technology. You want to set up a new email, and you want to also set up a bank account and a credit card in your own name at a different bank. That's important. You want to put passwords on your computer, on your iPad, on your phone, so that other people can't access your information. You want to create this new email so that all of the communication that you have is through this new email and can't be read by anyone. The next point is you want to hold a focused and business-like conversation as your first conversation. Excuse me. You want to be as devoid of emotion as possible. You want to be focused on your message and not wander. You want to be to the point so your message can't be misunderstood. And you want to make this conversation just about your decision. The second conversation is going to be much the same. You want to be focused. You want to have processed your emotions and leave them aside. You want to have a business-like conversation and yet empathetic into what this person may be experiencing. Those are the tips I would suggest. Now, I've mentioned to not follow this process if you're in domestic violence. There's one other situation where you don't necessarily want to follow this same process or have more expert guidance from someone like a coach. And that is if your spouse is a full-blown narcissist. because a narcissist is going to manipulate the situation to their benefit. They will manipulate conversations. They will try and put you down. They will try and take away your power. They will try and threaten your self-esteem. So that's another conversation that I would strongly, strongly suggest that you get expert help. So that is probably all of the tips necessary to have that conversation with your spouse, to actually deal with the overwhelm, the sadness, and the anger. So how do I help you eliminate your pain, overwhelm, sadness, and anger? Well, we do that through various means. We do that through working on your emotions. We measure your emotions. We go through exercises and we practice conversations that don't have these emotions involved. Another thing that's absolutely critical in healing is practicing gratitude. When you're practicing gratitude, you can't be filled with negative thoughts. That gratitude is a place where you look at all the beauty in your life rather than the negativity. Science has proven that when you are practicing gratitude and thinking positive thoughts, you are building positive pathways in the brain. The more you think negatively, the more negative pathways you're going to be creating in your brain. This way, the more and more you practice the positive, you practice the gratitude, these pathways are going to build. When you have negative pathways, what that implies is the next time you're going to have a reaction, that your brain is automatically going to go to the negative. The stronger your positive pathways, the more your brain's going to go to the positives. And that's absolutely critical. Now, the other thing to think about when you're going through this conversation is to have yourself go through an evaluation of your marriage and of your spouse. This way, to make absolutely sure that this is the conversation you want to have. And what I suggest is to evaluate your spouse, both the good and the bad, to evaluate yourself, the good and the bad. The next step would be to evaluate your marriage, the good and the bad. Keeping in mind there's good and bad in all of us. This way you can get more objective about your situation. And then the next step is to create a picture of who your ideal partner would be. What are their characteristics? What are their values? What are their behaviors? Then compare your spouse to that ideal and see what are the deal breakers. Do your values line up? Are you treated in a healthy way? What's important to you? And if that spouse comes up short, then that helps you reinforce your decision. If your spouse doesn't come up short, then you may want to rethink your thoughts before you pursue this divorce and this conversation. So I want you to think about this conversation as being the most important conversation you can have in divorce. It's absolutely critical. I want to thank you for being with me today on Her Empowered Divorce Live. If you'd like to learn more about how someone like me, a divorce coach, can help you save time, money, and heartache in divorce, well, I have a free ebook for you. It's all about Why Should I Use a Divorce Coach? And you can get this ebook at Her Empowered Divorce /divorce coach. This ebook will help guide you through the process of understanding how you need to be prepared for your divorce and for this conversation. I can't stress enough how important strong preparation is for this conversation. So with the right support and guidance, you can move through the divorce process with knowledge, skills, and confidence. Wouldn't that be great if you could feel confident, knowledgeable, and have the skills to deal with it? By skills, I mean time management, I mean communication skills, I mean negotiation skills. Wouldn't it be great to eliminate your overwhelm? So a divorce coach like me helps you understand and navigate the process, to come to terms with your emotions, to avoid costly mistakes, to find your true voice and be empowered. You see, most women have spent a lifetime investing in others while neglecting themselves. And divorce is not a time to do this. You want to assemble that divorce team that is a divorce coach, the certified divorce financial analyst, and your legal professional, and they can support you through your decisions that are going to impact you for a lifetime. Many people think, I'm going to get a divorce. They think about it as a one-time event with a beginning and an end. Well, a divorce lasts a lifetime, particularly if there's co-parenting involved. Think about a settlement. A settlement's going to impact you for a lifetime. Think about co-parenting. That's going to last you for a lifetime. So all the decisions you make, all of the conversations you have are going to impact you for a long, long time. So you need this team to help you think through this even before you talk to your spouse. So if you're interested in learning more, again, you can request my ebook at herempowereddivorce.com/divorce coach. Or you can schedule a free consultation with me at herempowereddivorce.com. What have you got to lose? I'd also like to give a special shout out to my sponsor, Nastava Artisan Jewelry, that creates big, bold statement jewelry for women who are becoming empowered. Nastava is the sponsor of the Her Empowered Divorce live broadcast. You can reach them at nastavajewelry.com. And we have a special just for this Going Solo episode that if you use Going Solo 30 at checkout, you'll receive 30% off your purchases. I've tried to sum up for you all the important steps required in having that first conversation with your spouse. Remember, you know your spouse better than anyone, so you can customize these conversations in the way that you think will reduce the negative impact for the long run. I'd like to say thank you to my listeners for being here today. You are so important to me, and I so want to bring you good information that can help you on your divorce journey. And until next time, I want you to take care and stay empowered.